Welcome, literature lovers. We are going to be looking at Act 1, Scene 2 of Macbeth today, going through line by line and seeing what Shakespeare is telling us in the second scene of his play. Who are our dramatis personae of this scene? Who are the top guys involved? Well, big lad up top. We've got King Duncan, King of Scotland, obviously going to be an important character for us. With him, we've got his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain. These guys are important right until the end of the play. Who's supporting the royal family? We've got the Thanes. These are King Duncan's top men, incredibly important people within Scotland and given the title of a Thane. A Thane is a title, a bit like a lord. We've got Lennox, we've got Ross, we've got Angus. Finally, to cap this off, we've got a guy without a title. We've got the Sergeant. Despite the fact he might not seem as important as the guys ahead of him that I've just talked about, he is one of the pivotal characters of this scene, and he tells us most of the information we get to know about Macbeth. Just a note on this, depending on your script, depending on what copy of the play you've got, he might be described as a captain instead, but it's the same guy. Now, what's going on then? Well, we've got two battles that are being fought. First battle, okay, they're both happening in Scotland, is going to be with MacDonald. MacDonald is fighting King Duncan with men from the Western Isles. That's our first battle. Second battle, taking advantage of the fact that this is already going on, we've got the King of Norway being supported and helped by the treacherous Thane of Cawdor. That's that word again there. So Thane of Cawdor is an important guy who's supposed to be loyal to Duncan, yet has acted treacherously, sided with the King of Norway, and gone against Duncan. So we've got two battles going on. Who's standing up for Duncan? Well, we've got our two generals here. We've got Macbeth and we've got his mate Banquo. Macbeth here is going to be pitted in battle against MacDonald and against the King of Norway and the Thane of Cawdor. Before we start then, let's have a look at the context of this time. Shakespeare has mined history for real characters to put in his play here. Firstly, King Duncan I, a real king of Scotland. 1034 to 1040, King Duncan reigned as King of Scotland. So our king in the play was a real king in real life. Who else? Well, Macbeth. Macbeth was also a big character in Scotland. In 1040, Duncan raided an area of Scotland called Moray, who was then ruled by Macbeth. Clearly, Macbeth wasn't happy about this. His lands had been invaded by Duncan. So Macbeth went to war with Duncan, defeated him, killed him, and then Macbeth then himself reigned as King Macbeth from 1040 to 1057. Now, just because Shakespeare has taken these characters from history doesn't mean that he's actually taken the history itself. Things change. Shakespeare hasn't taken this story entirely, but these two characters have come from history. On top of that, we've also got Malcolm. We just found out Malcolm is Duncan's son, and in real life, in history, Malcolm III, King Malcolm III, was Duncan's son. What happened there? Well, King Malcolm III, obviously, after his father had usurped, killed by Macbeth, had the throne taken from the family, invaded Scotland from England, and took the throne back and then reigned as King Malcolm III. So Macbeth, Duncan, and Malcolm, all real historical kings from Scotland. One final other thing that we've just seen here that's from history is our invasion, the King of Norway getting involved. Now, you've probably heard of this, perhaps with a different reign. During the 9th century, Norsemen, Vikings, raided Scotland regularly. They used to frequently attack parts of Scotland, the coastal areas, particularly monasteries, taking absolutely anything of value. So the Norse invasion there from the King of Norway is again embedded in historical fact. Now, this could just be something that Shakespeare wants to use. He's got ideas from history. There's nothing wrong with that. But there is also a more specific reason why people suspect Shakespeare has used these characters from history, and in particular from Scotland's history. Zoom in a little bit on this guy, King James I. So, he's there on the left. If you studied any of other Shakespeare's plays, you might have thought Queen Elizabeth was the ruler of England at this point when Shakespeare is writing. And you'd be right, for something like Romeo and Juliet, she was. However, she died. King James at this point was King James VI of Scotland. Elizabeth died childless, which means that King James VI of Scotland, a distant cousin of Queen Elizabeth, became King of England, becoming James I of England. Now, these two figures had a pretty messed up history. King James I's mother fled when he was 1 year old, making him king at age 1. However, she fled to England, where she was executed by Queen Elizabeth. She was a threat to her crown. As a Catholic, she was a threat to Elizabeth's power. So, just get this, James I is taking over as King of England from a woman who executed his own mother. Kind of crazy. However, what happened here is that him becoming King of England meant that England was ruled by a Scottish king, and a union of the Scottish and English crowns was created in 1603. Now, you might think this is important, this is just back history, but there's a lot of evidence that Shakespeare wrote this play specifically for King James I, not to be shown in his theatre, but to be shown privately in the court of James I of England, to try and impress him. Now, it's up to you to try and work out whether you think that's true, research it, see the history, but there's a lot of evidence, and it suggests why Shakespeare has used all that history from Scotland that we just talked about. Anyway, let's get back to the play itself. Where are we? Well, scene 2 starts in a camp near Forres in Scotland, and there is alarm within. Excessive trumpet sound effect. That basically means there's trumpets, and we enter Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain and Lennox with attendants, with supporters, with helpers, servants, whatever you want to call them, meeting with a bleeding sergeant. Now, this is the sergeant I'm saying that's important. He's just come from the battle and he's going to tell us everything that's happened. Some people suggest that he is covered in blood to the extent that he is unrecognisable. It's suggested in the text that this could be a reference to how violence changes people. So where we've got their bleeding sergeant, just think he is covered from head to toe in blood. And does this have any greater symbolic meaning about how battles, how violence, how war changes people? Certainly in this play, our characters are changed with violence. That is undisputed. All right, so let's go through Act 1, Scene 2. First of all, let's take a little point of structure. This is our exposition. This is the point in the play where Shakespeare is going to introduce us to all the key background information that we need to get the play going. And who's going to do that? Well, the sergeant is going to do that. This guy has just been introduced by Malcolm, who says he's a brave friend, suggests that he was the one that saved Malcolm from certain captivity. So this guy's a bit of a legend, but the entire purpose of this guy being in this play is to tell us how much of a legend Macbeth is. So how does he do it? Well, we've got some wonderful imagery here, some wonderful language. The sergeant comes up initially telling us about the battle. Doubtful it stood as two spent swimmers that do cling together. That's an awesome image. Imagine two people drowning in the river, trying to save each other by grabbing onto the other one, but in doing so, pulling each other down into the water. That's the image of King Duncan's generals there, desperately trying to save themselves, but in each other, pulling each other down. It's a dangerous battle. It's perilous. Some people also suggest that this is actually foreshadowing a little bit. Perhaps this is me being the English teacher here, but does this foreshadow Lady Macbeth and Macbeth's later relationship in trying to push each other on to greater things through their ambition? They actually drag each other down. So is Shakespeare, and this is a beautifully structured play, but is Shakespeare therefore giving us a clue that actually this is going to foreshadow what Macbeth and Lady Macbeth later do to each other? Anyway, back to the battle. We've got the merciless MacDonald. We've got alliteration there, bringing our enemy in. The sergeant has told us who the enemy is, and he is supported by multiplying villainies of the Western Isles that are swarming upon King Duncan's troops. Who are they? Well, possibly from Ireland, possibly from the Shetland Isles, but they have provided kerns and gallowglasses. These are formations of Celtic soldiers that are supporting MacDonald in his battle. What else is supporting him? Well, it's not just those men from the Western Isles. He's also got Fortune, Lady Luck. We've personified her here, who's smiling down on MacDonald like a rebel's whore. It's not unusual in literature to personify Lady Luck, and a particularly fickle character and often a woman, but here to describe her as rebel's whore really gives the emotion that the sergeant is pushing across to the audience about this battle. But now we hear about Macbeth, for brave Macbeth, for disdaining fortune. He is absolutely, despite all the odds, taken on MacDonald and is about to win. How? Well, look at that. His sword, brandished steel, smoked with bloody execution. That's another great image showing us that Macbeth is fighting so many of the enemies, chopping so many men down, that his sword is smoking. All right? He is that good in battle. Not only that, okay, another lovely phrase here. We've got him described as valor's minion. Valor being the courage in the face of danger. Valor is personified here, and Macbeth is valor's minion, valor's assistant throughout this. And he's carved out a passage. That means he's carved his way through the enemy. Yeah, you've got this image of this passage that Macbeth is fighting his way through, the gap behind him where he's killed the men in front of him. Who's he trying to get to? MacDonald, till he faced the slave. The slave here is MacDonald, who didn't even have time to shake hands or bid farewell to those who were around him. Macbeth was so efficient, so quick in getting to him. And what did he do when he got to him? Well, this is a gruesome image. He unseamed him from the nape to the chops. He chopped him, unzipped him from his belly button all the way up to his chin, and then fixed his head upon the battlements. A gruesome image to show us not only Macbeth's bravery, but also his brutality. He won't stop at anything in the quest of supporting King Duncan here. Again, a bit like we said before, perhaps there's an element of foreshadowing here. Think what happens towards the end of the play with Macbeth. So perhaps not only are we seeing Macbeth in the present here, but perhaps foreshadowing some clues to Macbeth in the future and what may even happen to him. The sergeant is still not finished. He's still got more to say about Macbeth. He explains that the King of Norway, supported by the traitorous Thane of Cawdor, saw his chance to attack. Duncan said, "Dismayed this not our captains? Were our captains not scared about having to fight two enemies?" The sergeant replies, "Yes," and gives us a couple of little similes here. Yes, they were scared. Yes, about as much as an eagle is scared of a tiny sparrow. And he goes on, yes, they were scared, about as much as a lion is scared of the hare. So, of course, once again, emphasising Macbeth's great bravery. On top of that, if you wanted a little bit more evidence that Macbeth didn't shy away from the violence in supporting King Duncan, they redoubled their strokes upon the foe, except they meant to bathe in the reeking wounds, suggesting that they killed so many people it seemed like they wanted to bathe in the blood. Or memorize another Golgotha, okay? That is the point where Jesus was crucified. So to suggest that they're going to create a famous site of violence as famous as that where Jesus himself was killed. So the sergeant is really going over the top in saying what an incredible battle this was for Macbeth. What an absolute legend this guy was, supporting loyally King Duncan's cause, putting everything on the line for him, fighting without fear. So we know the sergeant's opinion on all of what's happened. We know his great admiration for Macbeth. Perhaps we're thinking as an audience, well, you know, maybe he's just paid the sergeant or something. Who knows? Well, if that was the case, we've also got Ross turn up at this point to back up everything the sergeant says. Ross talks a little bit about the King of Norway with terrible numbers, great troops, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. He then describes till that Bellona's bridegroom, the Roman goddess of war. He's suggesting that Macbeth is the husband, the bridegroom of the goddess of war herself, again supporting absolutely everything the sergeant has just told us. Lapped in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, curving his lavish spirit, and to conclude, The victory fell on us. We know at this point Macbeth has defeated both the armies, won both of the battles for King Duncan, and done it in an incredibly heroic manner. So how do we finish the scene? King Duncan makes a proclamation. No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go pronounce his present death. The Thane of Cawdor, the treacherous Thane of Cawdor, shall be executed. And with his former title, greet Macbeth. Macbeth is going to be the new Thane of Cawdor, given all the lands, the title, and everything that comes with being the Thane. We've already got Thane of Glamis, and now he's going to add the Thane of Cawdor. Just as a piece of interest, we've got Cawdor Castle down there as it stands today. So real place, and you would have had a real Thane there. Now, I want to just zoom in on some language here. We talked about the way the witches spoke in Act 1, Scene 1 through a trochaic tetrameter. Well, we've got a specific way here too, and it's much more common for Shakespeare. You may have come across it already if you studied a different play. It's called iambic pentameter. So first thing, it's a pentameter. Rather than being a tetrameter with 4 pairs of stressed and unstressed syllables, we've got a pentameter. So we're going to have 5 pairs. And it's not trochaic, it's iambic. That's the opposite way round, that it's unstressed followed by stressed. No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive. Okay, the stress there is always on the second syllable. Just going to introduce you to another term that might be useful for you. Each one of those pairs, stressed and unstressed, is called a foot. So each one of those pairs of syllables is called a foot. So we've got foot 1 there, no more. We then got foot 2, 3, 4, and 5, continuing after that. So we've got 5 feet, an iambic pentameter in 5 feet. Why does Shakespeare do this? Well, we talked about why he used the way that he spoke for the witches. Now, iambic pentameter is much more common. Some people have suggested because this is the natural way we speak, and some people said it is easier for his actors to remember the lines. This may be true, okay, no doubt about it. However, another option is if we think about when Shakespeare does use this, it's often in times of heightened emotion. Right here, we're at the end of a battle. Romeo and Juliet, it's when Romeo's getting all hot under the collar, staring up at Juliet. So times of heightened emotion. And you can suggest perhaps that it mimics the heartbeat. Okay, the rhythm of the language of the iambic pentameter is mimicking the heartbeat. So Shakespeare is not only talking of the heart, but he's mimicking the heartbeat in the words that he's using. Incredibly clever stuff. Really, really great stuff. And something you can certainly talk about when you're writing in your exams or your essays. So let's wrap this one up. How is Macbeth portrayed? This scene has been all about Macbeth. Doesn't have him in it, but it's all about him. Brave, disdaining fortune. His sword brandished still, smoked with bloody execution. He was Valor's minion. When it came to MacDonald, he unseated him from the nave to the chops. Was he scared? Yeah, about as much as eagles were scared of sparrows or lions are scared of the hare. He was the goddesses of war's husband, her bridegroom. He was described as noble. He had the full package in this scene, and that is how the audience is introduced to Macbeth. He is described as ruthless in his dealings of his enemies. He's described as fearless in the face of all insurmountable odds. He's described as loyal to King Duncan. He is brave. He's got the whole thing going on here. Just think for a minute. If you know the rest of the play right now, Macbeth is your best friend here, but your worst enemy. Why do we think that Shakespeare sets up the play so the audience has this image of Macbeth, especially knowing what happens later in the play? Have a think about that and check out the next video for your next scene. Cheers for watching.